Good day, friends, and welcome back to Conflicts of the Human Race. Today, I will tell you about the entire story of the Albigensian Crusade, 1209, 1229. Now buckle up as we begin. In the verdant hills of southern France, a religious movement had taken root that would soon shake the very foundations of medieval Catholicism. The Cathars, also known as Albigensians after the town of Albi, believed in a dualistic faith that rejected the material world as evil and embraced spiritual purification. By the early 13th century, this heretical sect had gained significant following among the nobility and common folk of Languedoc, creating a direct challenge to papal authority. Pope Innocent III, one of the most powerful pontiffs in history, watched with growing alarm as entire regions slipped away from Orthodox Catholic control. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define the relationship between church and state, orthodoxy and heresy, for centuries to come. The assassination of papal legate Pierre de Castelnau in January 1208 provided Pope Innocent III with the perfect justification for holy war. Castelnau, a Cistercian monk tasked with rooting out heresy in the Languedoc, had been murdered after excommunicating Count Raymond VI of Toulouse for his tolerance of Cathars. Though Raymond's direct involvement remained unclear, the Pope immediately blamed him and issued a bull calling for a crusade against the heretics. This was no ordinary religious campaign. Innocent offered the same spiritual indulgences granted to those fighting in the Holy Land, plus the unprecedented promise that crusaders could claim the lands of heretics for themselves. Northern French nobles, eager for southern wealth and territory, began mobilizing their armies. The economic motivations were as powerful as the religious ones, as Languedoc's prosperity through trade and agriculture made it an attractive target. The Pope's call resonated throughout northern Europe, promising both salvation and earthly rewards to those who would take up arms against their southern neighbors. By the spring of 1209, an enormous army had assembled in Lyon under the nominal leadership of papal legate Arnaud de Malric, abbot of Citeaux. This crusading host numbered between 20,000 and 100,000 men, including powerful nobles like Simon de Montfort, who would emerge as the Crusade's most ruthless commander. The army represented a formidable coalition of northern French barons, German knights, and contingents from across Catholic Europe, all united by the promise of plenary indulgence and territorial gain. As they marched south along the Rhone Valley, their banners displayed both the cross of crusade and the personal arms of ambitious nobles. The sheer size of this force dwarfed anything the fragmented southern lords could field against them. Count Raymond VI of Toulouse, recognizing the hopelessness of resistance, performed public penance at the Abbey of St. Gilles, submitting to ritual humiliation, including a public flogging. However, his submission was viewed with suspicion, and many crusaders remained determined to proceed with their campaign of conquest and purification. The crusading army's first target was the prosperous city of Béziers, whose citizens had refused to surrender their Cathar neighbors to the papal forces. On July 22, 1209, after a brief siege, the city's defenses were breached when defenders foolishly attempted a sortie against the Crusader camp. What followed became one of medieval Europe's most notorious massacres. When the crusading soldiers asked papal legate Arnaud de Malric how to distinguish between Catholics and heretics among the population, he allegedly replied with words that would echo through history: "Kill them all, God will recognize his own." The slaughter that ensued was indiscriminate and total. Men, women, and children were butchered without mercy as the Crusaders swept through the streets. Churches offered no sanctuary. Hundreds who sought refuge in the Cathedral of Saint Nazaire were burned alive when the building was set ablaze. By evening, Béziers was a smoking ruin, and its entire population of approximately 20,000 souls had been exterminated. The massacre sent shockwaves throughout the Languedoc and established the Crusade's reputation for unprecedented brutality. The news of Béziers' total destruction spread like wildfire throughout southern France, causing panic and mass surrenders. Town after town opened their gates to the crusading army rather than face similar annihilation. Narbonne, Carcassonne, and dozens of smaller settlements capitulated without resistance as word of the massacre preceded the Crusader advance. The psychological warfare had proven devastatingly effective. The Crusaders had demonstrated that they would show no mercy to those who resisted. However, this reign of terror also began to reveal the complex motivations driving the campaign. While religious fervor had initiated the crusade, territorial ambition increasingly dominated its conduct. Northern French nobles eyed the rich lands of Languedoc with undisguised greed, and the Pope's promise that heretics' property could be legitimately seized provided legal justification for wholesale confiscation. Simon de Montfort emerged as the most capable and ruthless of the crusading commanders, systematically conquering territory and establishing his own feudal domain. The original religious mission became secondary to a war of conquest that would fundamentally alter the political map of France. Simon de Montfort's siege of Carcassonne in August 1209 marked a turning point in the Crusade's character and objectives. The city, ruled by the young Raymond Roger Trencavel, had become a refuge for Cathars and Jews fleeing the northern advance. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Trencavel initially refused to surrender, hoping his massive fortifications could withstand the assault. However, the siege quickly revealed the Crusaders' sophisticated military capabilities. They employed the latest siege technologies, including mangonels, trebuchets, and undermining techniques that made even the strongest medieval fortifications vulnerable. After just 2 weeks, with disease spreading among the overcrowded population and water supplies running low, Carcassonne was forced to negotiate. Trencavel agreed to meet with the crusading leaders under guarantee of safe conduct, but was treacherously imprisoned during the negotiations. With their lord captured, the city surrendered unconditionally. The Crusaders offered the conquered territory to various northern nobles, but most declined, fearing the difficulties of governing a hostile population so far from their home bases. Simon de Montfort accepted the challenge, becoming Viscount of Béziers and Carcassonne. With Carcassonne secured, Simon de Montfort began establishing his authority over the conquered territories with characteristic ruthlessness and efficiency. Unlike many crusading nobles who sought quick profit and return home, Montfort envisioned building a permanent domain in the south. He systematically replaced local officials with his own northern French administrators, imposed new laws based on northern customs, and began the methodical persecution of anyone suspected of heretical sympathies. His reputation for extreme cruelty grew as he employed increasingly brutal methods to enforce submission. At Bram in 1210, he ordered the mutilation of over 100 prisoners. Their eyes were gouged out and noses cut off, with one man left with a single eye to guide the others to nearby Cabaret as a warning to other resistors. These atrocities served a calculated purpose: to break the spirit of resistance through terror, while demonstrating that opposition to his rule would result in consequences worse than death. The systematic brutality transformed what had begun as a religious crusade into a war of colonial conquest, with Montfort emerging as the undisputed architect of northern French domination over Languedoc. The siege of Minerve in 1210 demonstrated the Crusade's evolving focus on the systematic extermination of Cathar religious leadership. This small but strategically important fortress housed a significant community of Cathar perfecti, the religion's ordained ministers who had taken vows of complete spiritual dedication. Montfort's forces surrounded the hilltop stronghold and began a methodical siege, employing massive stone-throwing engines nicknamed Malvoisin, bad neighbor, that systematically demolished the town's defenses. The garrison, led by Guilhem de Minerve, held out for 7 weeks despite diminishing supplies and constant bombardment. When surrender became inevitable, negotiations focused specifically on the fate of the Cathar perfecti. Papal legate Arnaud de Malric made it clear that while ordinary citizens might be spared if they renounced heresy, the perfecti must either convert to Catholicism or face death. On July 22, 210, exactly 1 year after the massacre at Béziers. 140 Cathar perfecti were led to a massive pyre outside the town walls. Not one chose conversion over martyrdom. They walked into the flames singing hymns, their willing sacrifice shocking even hardened Crusader veterans and creating the Crusade's first group of heretical martyrs. The massacre at Lavore in May 1211 marked perhaps the Crusade's most systematic display of religious persecution and noble vengeance. The fortress, defended by Dame Geraude and her brother Aymery de Montreal, had become a symbol of southern resistance to northern conquest. After a bitter siege, Montfort's forces breached the defences and captured the garrison. What followed revealed the personal hatreds that now drove the conflict beyond mere religious differences. Aymery de Montreal, a respected southern knight who had defied Montfort's authority, was hanged along with 80 of his men-at-arms in a mass execution that violated medieval conventions regarding the treatment of noble prisoners. Dame Geraude, one of the few female military commanders of the Crusade, was thrown alive down a well and stoned to death, a particularly brutal end that shocked contemporaries. But the religious persecution proved even more extensive. Over 400 Cathar perfecti had sought refuge in Lavore, and all were burned together in what witnesses described as the largest single execution pyre of the entire Crusade. The systematic nature of these killings demonstrated that the Crusade had evolved into something unprecedented in medieval European warfare. King Peter II of Aragon's intervention in 1213 transformed the Albigensian Crusade from a religious conflict into a major international war. Peter, who had vassals and family connections throughout Languedoc, could no longer ignore Montfort's systematic conquest of territories traditionally within Aragonese influence. Despite being a devout Catholic who had recently fought Muslims in Spain, Peter viewed the Crusade as northern French imperialism disguised as religious war. He formed a coalition with the dispossessed southern nobles, including his brother-in-law Count Raymond VI of Toulouse and the young Raymond Roger Trencavel's supporters. This alliance represented the last hope for preserving the independent culture and political autonomy of southern France. Pope Innocent III found himself in an impossible position. Peter was technically a papal vassal and crusading hero, yet he was opposing a papal crusade. The Pope attempted diplomatic solutions, but both sides had progressed too far toward military confrontation. By summer 1213, two large armies maneuvered toward each other near the town of Muret, setting the stage for a battle that would determine whether southern France remained independent or fell permanently under northern control. The Battle of Muret on September 12, 1213, became one of medieval Europe's most decisive engagements, effectively ending southern France's hopes for independence. Despite commanding superior numbers, perhaps 4,000 men against Montfort's 17,000, the coalition army suffered from poor coordination between its various contingents. King Peter's Aragonese knights, Count Raymond's Toulouse forces, and the southern French nobility had different fighting styles and competing objectives that undermined unified command. Montfort, recognizing his numerical disadvantage, employed brilliant tactical innovation by launching a surprise cavalry charge directly at the enemy's strongest point, rather than attempting a defensive battle. The audacious assault caught the coalition forces while they were still deploying, creating chaos in their ranks before they could properly organize. King Peter II, fighting in the front line as was customary for medieval monarchs, was killed early in the battle when he became separated from his bodyguard during the initial charge. His death demoralized the entire coalition army, which disintegrated into panicked flight. Count Raymond VI barely escaped with his life, while hundreds of southern nobles died defending their homeland. Montfort's impossible victory secured northern control over Languedoc and effectively ended organized military resistance to the Crusade. Following his triumph at Muret, Simon de Montfort moved quickly to consolidate his conquests and establish permanent northern dominance over the defeated south. The death of King Peter II had eliminated the most powerful external threat to Crusader control, while the flight of Count Raymond VI left Toulouse itself defenseless. Montfort's systematic approach to conquest now revealed its full effectiveness. He had not merely won battles, but had constructed an entire administrative apparatus to govern his new domain. Northern French administrators replaced southern officials throughout the conquered territories, while new laws based on northern customs superseded traditional southern legal practices. The Crusades' religious mission continued alongside this political transformation, with systematic persecution of remaining Cathars intensifying under Montfort's direct oversight. Entire communities suspected of heretical sympathies were uprooted and relocated, while their properties were redistributed to northern French settlers. This population engineering aimed to create irreversible demographic changes that would prevent future rebellion. By 1215, Montfort controlled more territory than many kings, ruling from the Mediterranean coast to the approaches of Toulouse itself. His success attracted additional northern nobles seeking their own fortunes in the conquered south, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of settlement and control. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 provided international legitimacy for Montfort's conquests while revealing the complex political calculations underlying the Crusades' religious facade. Pope Innocent III convened this great assembly of church leaders to address pressing issues including heresy, crusading, and church reform. The fate of Languedoc dominated much of the council's attention, with representatives arguing for and against Montfort's claims to the conquered territories. Count Raymond VI appeared personally to plead for restoration of his lands, arguing that he had submitted to the church and performed required penance for his alleged sins. However, Montfort's supporters presented compelling evidence of the Crusades' success in eliminating heresy and establishing Orthodox Catholic government throughout the conquered regions. The council's decision to confirm Montfort as legitimate ruler of most conquered territories represented a triumph of practical politics over traditional feudal law. This papal endorsement transformed what had been a military conquest into legally recognized sovereignty, making future resistance technically rebellious rather than patriotic. The council's decree also demonstrated how religious authority could be employed to justify and legitimize territorial aggrandizement, setting precedents that would influence church-state relations for centuries. Count Raymond VI's dramatic return to Toulouse in 1217 ignited a massive popular uprising that revealed the depth of southern resentment against northern occupation. Despite the Papal Council's legal endorsement of Montfort's rule, the dispossessed count retained enormous loyalty among his former subjects who had experienced 4 years of foreign domination. His appearance at the city gates triggered spontaneous celebrations as thousands of citizens opened the defenses and welcomed their traditional lord home. This popular rebellion spread rapidly throughout the Toulouse region as communities that had submitted to Montfort rose in coordinated revolt. The uprising's success demonstrated that military conquest alone could not create lasting political control without popular acceptance. Montfort found his carefully constructed administration collapsing as local officials fled or switched sides, while his scattered garrisons faced siege from their own subjects. The rebellion's religious dimensions were equally significant. Many communities harbored surviving Cathars who emerged from hiding to support Raymond's return, viewing it as divine vindication of their resistance to crusading persecution. Within months, Montfort's domain had shrunk dramatically as town after town declared for Raymond VI, forcing the northern commander to begin reconquest of territories he had considered permanently secured. The siege of Toulouse, beginning in 1217, became Simon de Montfort's greatest challenge and ultimately his downfall. Unlike his previous campaigns against isolated fortresses, Montfort now faced a major city defended by its entire population and supported by widespread regional rebellion. The siege revealed how dramatically the conflict had evolved from its origins as a religious crusade. This was now clearly a war of national liberation against foreign occupation. Montfort's forces surrounded the city, but found their opponents employing sophisticated defensive strategies learned from years of crusading warfare. The citizens had constructed elaborate siege works, stockpiled supplies, and organized their defense with the desperation of people fighting for their homeland's survival. Months of bombardment and assault failed to breach Toulouse's defenses, while Montfort's army suffered from disease, desertion, and constant harassment from Raymond's supporters throughout the region. The siege's duration allowed opposition to consolidate throughout southern France, with communities previously terrorized into submission now openly supporting the rebellion. By 1218, Montfort found himself commanding a demoralized army besieging a defiant city, while losing control of his conquests throughout Languedoc. The Crusade's momentum had not merely stalled, it had reversed completely, transforming the former conqueror into a desperate commander fighting for survival. Simon de Montfort's death on June 25, 1218, marked the effective end of the first phase of the Albigensian Crusade and became one of medieval warfare's most dramatic moments. As Montfort inspected his siege works outside Toulouse, the city's defenders launched a massive stone from a mangonel operated, according to contemporary accounts, by women and girls from the city. The projectile struck Montfort in the head, killing him instantly and sending shockwaves through the crusading army. Contemporary chroniclers recorded the moment with varying interpretations. Northern writers mourned the death of a heroic crusader, while southern accounts celebrated divine justice against a brutal oppressor. His death immediately triggered the collapse of crusader morale and organization. Amaury de Montfort, Simon's eldest son, inherited his father's claims, but lacked both the military genius and ruthless determination that had made conquest possible. Within months, the siege of Toulouse was abandoned as Amaury's forces retreated northward, leaving most of the conquered territories in rebellion. The psychological impact of Montfort's death extended far beyond military considerations. It demonstrated that the seemingly invincible northern conquest could be reversed, inspiring continued resistance throughout Languedoc while attracting renewed support from neighboring kingdoms eager to exploit crusader weakness. Following Simon de Montfort's death, the crusade entered a period of stalemate and gradual southern recovery under the weak leadership of his son Amaury. Count Raymond VI and his son, the future Raymond VII, systematically reclaimed their ancestral domains, while Amaury proved incapable of maintaining his father's conquests. The younger Montfort lacked both military skill and the personal magnetism that had attracted northern nobles to his father's banner, causing many crusading families to abandon their southern holdings and return to their northern estates. By 1224, Amaury controlled little beyond Carcassonne and a few scattered fortresses, prompting him to make a desperate decision that would transform the conflict's final character. Recognizing his inability to maintain independent control over his inheritance, Amaury ceded all his claims to the French crown, appealing directly to King Louis VII for royal intervention. This decision fundamentally altered the Crusade's nature from a feudal conquest led by ambitious nobles into a royal campaign of territorial annexation. The involvement of the French crown brought vastly superior resources to bear against southern resistance, but also stripped the conflict of its remaining religious pretense, revealing it as naked territorial aggrandizement by the northern French monarchy. King Louis VII's invasion of Languedoc in 1226 brought overwhelming force against the exhausted southern resistance, effectively ending any hope of maintaining independence from northern control. Unlike the earlier crusading armies composed of feudal contingents with competing interests, the royal expedition represented the unified might of the French monarchy at its medieval zenith. Louis commanded professional soldiers, superior siege equipment, and unlimited financial resources that dwarfed anything his predecessors could deploy. The campaign's systematic character revealed how much military technology and organization had advanced during the Crusade's duration. City after city surrendered without resistance as communities recognized the futility of opposing royal power. However, Louis's unexpected death from dysentery at Montpensier in November 1226 created another power vacuum that prolonged southern suffering. His widow, Blanche of Castile, assumed the regency for young Louis IX and continued the royal conquest with characteristic determination. The involvement of this formidable queen demonstrated that the crusade had become a fundamental royal policy transcending individual monarchs' preferences. Under royal direction, the conquest proceeded more methodically, but also more mercifully than under Simon de Montfort, as the crown sought to integrate rather than terrorize the southern population. The Treaty of Paris in 1229 formally ended the Albigensian Crusade while establishing the framework for southern France's permanent integration into the northern French kingdom. Count Raymond VII, exhausted by 20 years of warfare and facing impossible odds against royal French power, accepted terms that preserved his life and title while surrendering effective independence. The treaty's provisions revealed the Crusade's ultimate consequences. Raymond retained Toulouse and its immediate vicinity, but ceded vast territories to the crown, while agreeing that his lands would revert to royal control upon his death if he produced no male heir. The agreement also mandated the establishment of the University of Toulouse, ironically creating an institution of learning in a region devastated by religious war. Most significantly, the treaty required Raymond's continued cooperation in pursuing remaining Cathars, transforming the former defender of southern independence into an instrument of religious persecution. This final irony demonstrated how completely the Crusade had achieved its objectives through systematic application of superior force over 2 decades. The agreement marked not merely the end of military resistance, but the beginning of systematic cultural assimilation that would gradually eliminate the distinctive civilization of medieval Languedoc. The Albigensian Crusade's conclusion in 1229 marked a watershed moment in European history, establishing precedents for religious persecution, royal centralization, and cultural assimilation that would influence Western civilization for centuries. The 20-year conflict had accomplished its primary objectives through systematic application of overwhelming force. The Cathar heresy was effectively eliminated. Southern French independence was permanently ended, and the region's distinctive culture was gradually absorbed into northern French norms. The Crusade's methods, however, had revealed disturbing possibilities for using religious authority to justify territorial conquest and cultural destruction. The systematic nature of the persecution, the calculated employment of terror as policy, and the successful merger of spiritual and temporal authority in pursuit of political objectives created templates for future conflicts throughout Europe. The successful integration of Languedoc into the French kingdom demonstrated how military conquest could be transformed into lasting political control through careful application of legal, religious, and administrative pressure over extended periods. Most tragically, the Crusade's success in eliminating an entire religious community and its supporting culture proved that medieval European civilization possessed both the capability and willingness to commit what modern observers would recognize as systematic persecution approaching genocide. The Albigensian Crusade, thus, stands as both a medieval success story and a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power deployed in service of ideological purity. If you liked today's story, make sure to check out our other videos on our channel. Have a nice day.